Hey everybody, welcome to the Addiction Unlimited podcast, where you get to learn everything you want to know about addiction and recovery. I'm your host, Angela Pugh, co-founder of Kansas City Recovery, life coach, and recovering alcoholic. To learn more about me, you can listen to episode 0 on your podcast app or find us on the web at addictionunlimited.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Addiction Unlimited podcast. I am Angela Pugh, your host. Thank you for spending some time with me today. I do appreciate you guys taking the time to listen and all your feedback. I love it. Thank you so much. And today we're going to talk about, I'm going to answer another question that I got on an email from addictionunlimited.com. Obviously, you guys can send me emails from there. You can also leave me a voice message right on the homepage. And I'm actually recording video at the same time that I'm recording the podcast. So you'll be able to find that video on the YouTube channel when that's up and going. So I'm going to read this question for you guys. I get these sort of questions a lot, just asking about different levels of drinkers, problem drinkers, alcoholics, what is the difference? When do you become sort of physically dependent and things like that? So I'm going to read this. I do have permission from the person that sent me the email to read the email. She just asked that I not use her name. So I'm going to leave that out and I'm just going to read this to you guys. She says, "Hi, Angela. I have been semi-sober for 113 days. This is a term I invented on 9/10/18 when I decided to try and get my drinking under control. I want to ask you some questions about this, but first I will give you some background. I truly don't know if I would be considered an alcoholic. Probably doesn't matter either way as it's just a label. I certainly toe the line between social drinking and problem drinking. It's a gray area. I don't crave alcohol, but I crave the feeling of being drunk and free. I don't have to have a drink every night, but once I get buzzed, I lose the ability to cut myself off and I get wasted. I only get drunk with friends, but I get drunker than them, and I cannot trust the person I become when I am drunk. I black out. I run away barefoot at 2 a.m. and pass out on the side of the road. I lay in the bushes at a bank on a cold winter night. I drive into the fridge in my garage. I get a DUI. I throw potted plants. I yell at strangers, etc. In summary, I recognize that I have a drinking tipping point where if I reach it, I will not stop drinking. I will lose control and I will do regrettable things. I gave up drinking altogether for a couple of weeks in August, but found it unbearable when people would ask me why I wasn't drinking. I couldn't tell them. I didn't know how to put it into words. It was totally unsustainable. My solution to this was to drink, but to create a set of rules designed to keep me in control while still drinking. My tipping point for launching into an out-of-control blackout rampage is when I'm starting to feel buzzed. So if I can avoid the buzz, I am fine, I think. This was how SemiSobriety came to be. For me, that means having no more than 2 drinks on a work night, 4 drinks spread out over at least 3 hours on a non-work night, or 6 drinks spread out over an entire day on a non-work day. No more than 3 drinking nights per week, and no more than 12 total drinks in a week. This has worked so far. I don't get drunk. I stay in control and I don't have to explain anything to people because they don't ask about it when I have a beer in hand. My problem is this. I feel like a cheater. I want to be proud of my semi-sobriety because it has taken a ton of self-restraint and discipline to stay in control for almost 4 months. I can relate to the stories on your podcast of people enjoying not feeling hungover, not getting arrested, feeling less guilt, etc. But I am a phony, so I can't be proud. Is semi-sobriety even a thing I can celebrate, or am I just tricking myself into thinking I have drinking under control? I really want to hear your thoughts on this. I don't have anyone in my life with experience on the subject. Sorry for the long post. Hope all is well. Well, first of all, I think you hit on some really super important things in there. And there are a lot of things that people get hung up on a little bit in trying to figure out if they have a problem with drinking or maybe a binge drinker. But one of the things that I pick up immediately is all the rules around drinking. Because to me, when you have to place rules on something, it's typically because you've already lost control. And that loss of control is one of the true signs that I have a bigger issue with alcohol. So putting rules on it, especially if we put rules on it and we break our own rules, that's definitely an issue and it's something to look at. For me, when I first wondered if I had a problem with alcohol, I was 24 years old. And what I noticed, a lot of you guys have heard me talk about this before, but what I noticed was my relationship with alcohol was different. I just knew that I was a little more attached to it. I knew I wanted to do it more often than my friends did. And, I always talk about things like at the end of the night when my friends would be going home to go to bed and we'd be in the parking lot waving goodbye. In my head, I was thinking like, why are they going home when we could drink more? Like that doesn't make sense. I just always wanted to do it more. I was more attached to it. And when I was 24 was the first time I had that thought, like, I wonder if I'm an alcoholic. And I didn't have a lot of the stereotypical signs and symptoms that you hear people talk about, like drinking in the morning or drinking alone. I wasn't doing any of that yet. I wasn't a blackout drinker at that point. I was a fairly new drinker in my early 20s, actually. So I didn't have a lot of tolerance or anything. I just knew that I was more attached to it than other people were. And one of the things I tell people too is, how much of your mind space does it occupy? Like how much of your time do you spend really thinking about alcohol or thinking about drinking or planning drinking, inviting everybody to drink? Those are some big things to look at because a non-alcoholic person just doesn't think about alcohol that much. They certainly don't carve out a special time and space to plan it. And, like obviously if there's a special event or wedding or graduation, like that's going to take some planning. But if you're at work on a Friday afternoon and everybody around you is working diligently, getting ready for the weekend, and you spend your whole Friday afternoon like planning happy hour and sending out the emails and deciding who's going to come and where it's going to be. And that's taking up a lot of your mind space, right? That's something to think about. The other thing is that lack of control once you start. So many people that don't drink every day doesn't necessarily mean they don't have a problem, because the bigger piece to pay attention to there is that lack of control. Like once I start, am I able to stop? And as she pointed out in her email, that's where she lacks, right? Once she starts, she doesn't stop. I was the same way. Another thing to think about that always really stood out to me was drinking for effect, right? Like a non-alcoholic person might have a drink, half a drink and a half maybe. I don't even think they usually have that much, but I don't know what non-alcoholic people do really. But I know they don't drink for the effect. In fact, I know very well that when they start getting some sort of effect and they start feeling it, typically they stop because they don't want to go any further. I remember one time in my early 30s, I can't remember if I was sober. I may have been just a few months sober at the time. And as you guys know, I was a bartender for many years and I bartended well into my sobriety. And I was at the bar. One of the girls that worked at my bar, her boyfriend was picking her up and he was sitting at the bar having a drink while he was waiting for her to get finished. And he was a great guy. I loved chatting with him and he had finished his beer. And I go, Ryan, do you want another beer? And he looked at me and he's like, no, Angela, I'm starting to feel it now. I better stop. And I remember being so baffled by that. It was like, what do you mean you better stop? Like at that point, I'd be getting a double shot of tequila and slamming the beer I had and getting another one, like that's the time I would really kick it up a notch. So again, I just recognized that my relationship with alcohol is a little different than other people. So those are really the important things I think about when I was really figuring out if I was an alcoholic. The other thing I talk about too is when my sort of life decisions start to revolve around my drinking. Like at one point I remember apartment hunting and I remember thinking in my head, like, I always like to live next to a freeway, and I've been that way my whole life. Like in my 20s, I lived in Hollywood right next to the 101. Where I live now, I live next to the freeway. It's just a thing because I like to be able to jump on the freeway and get wherever I need to go. And I realized what really started that for me in my early 20s was because I thought it was easier to drive drunk on the freeway than to take back roads, right? On back roads, my margin for error was far greater. And that's how it made sense in my head. I know other people have different theories, but that was mine. So as I was looking for apartments, that's what I was thinking about. I was like, oh, this is too far from the freeway. I would have to drive too far drunk. All of my big decisions started to revolve around my drinking. Like if I was going to hang out with my family, it would be, my friends, of course, would be on standby whenever I could get out of there. I would stay the shortest amount of time possible because I wanted to go meet my friends and I wanted to start drinking. And my family wasn't a big drinking family. So bare minimum, I would spend the least amount of time I could and I had to get out of there to go meet my friends to drink. Everything kind of revolved around that. When I would date somebody, that was something that I would always think about is like, okay, are they going to interfere with my drinking? Are they going to drink like me? Or are they going to get mad at me when I want to go drinking? Because those things would be a problem for me. Again, super selfish. I had my own agenda and that's just what I wanted to do. And I didn't want anything to interfere with it. Obviously job, because I was a bartender, that's a pretty easy one. My job kind of did revolve around drinking and that was very acceptable. And most of the time you made more money and you sold more drinks when you were drinking with people. So that kind of worked out. And I didn't have to be up early for work. So I didn't have some of those consequences of losing jobs or getting in trouble at work and things of that nature. But I really appreciate a lot of the things that she asked in this email. I think they're great questions. And I really, too, can feel her pain in trying to figure that out, And one of the most painful parts of my addiction for me was toward the very, very end when I was in that space that I knew I needed to give up drinking for good. I knew I needed to be finished, but I just couldn't get myself to do it, and that was the most miserable time for me of all. Out of all the years of my drinking, that was the worst because I knew I was going against everything inside of me. I know the difference between right and wrong, right? So I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew the right thing was to stop, but I just couldn't get myself to do it. It was so scary and it was overwhelming. And if I would have realized the benefits, how much more fun it was and how much better my life was and what a better human being I am, if I would have realized all those benefits, I swear I would have stopped much, much earlier. I just didn't know. I really didn't know any better. So those are the things I think are the important things to look at. Placing rules around drinking, that's always a warning sign because you're trying to control something you've already lost control of, right? Again, a non-addicted person would never have to place rules around their drinking. They would just not do it. Hanging on to your drinking despite negative consequences. That's another one. If you're having legal trouble, DUIs, things like that, if you're blacking out, if you're waking up the next day and you're having to call your friends and apologize for the things that you did, or like me, there were times that I would have to look in my garage and make sure my car was there. And I wasn't a big blackout drinker, but things would always be a little fuzzy, All of those things are issues. People that maybe get mean when they drink and say things they don't like, or say things that aren't nice or friendly. Those are issues. If you continue drinking despite negative consequences, that really is a signal of an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. Your attachment is just too much. Definitely when your sort of life decisions start to revolve around alcohol, that's a big one as well. And when you're isolating, that lack of control, once you start, you don't really stop. Even if you only drink 2 times a year, if you lack that control, once you start, you can't stop. That is a loss of control. So that's a huge warning sign. So another thing to really think about in this process too is having friends and family that drink a lot. When we create our circle of people really to support what we're doing at the time, right? So this is a whole other issue because your sense of normal can get really off base. And for me, because I was a bartender literally my whole adult life, everybody I knew drank every day. That was normal to me. When I got sober at 33 and a half, I was shocked to find out that there really were people that never drank. I literally thought like the whole world drank all the time. So it does skew what your sense of normal is. And I look at it now, like I look back on my drinking life and kind of how I lived day to day. And it's really shocking to me because it seems like such a waste. I spent so much of my life just sitting on a bar stool, or just in the bar, even if I was working. But, outside of work, just sitting on a bar stool, talking and just drinking and drinking and drinking and smoking. And that was my idea of fun. Not to mention I drove drunk almost every day of my life, really. And it's just crazy to look back at it now and to think that I lived my life like that every day. And it's embarrassing too, because I think we do kind of wear it as a badge of honor. Like I remember always bragging about my tolerance and how much I could drink because I was such a little person and I could drink so much alcohol. And I thought I was so cool because of that. Or, laughing off when I would get a DUI or one of my friends would get a DUI, we would just laugh it off and be like, oh, it's no big deal. Everybody's got one. And I think we really would do that, but partially because that was normal. When you live that life, there obviously are going to be some issues, but even embarrassing moments, like things people would do, again, like having to wake up the next day and apologize to your friends for things you said or anything like that. But I think that we laugh it off so that it doesn't feel so bad. And the other thing to recap is, how often you drink really isn't one of the deciding factors in my head. It's not about the frequency. It's more about that inability to control it once you get started. Again, it doesn't matter if you only drink 5 times a year. If every time you drink, or most times that you drink, you get in trouble or get in a bar fight or have to apologize to people, that's a problem because that's a loss of control. Also, there is such a thing as problem drinkers. I've definitely worked with people that ended up being problem drinkers, people that were going through some significant issues in their life, and they would have maybe a couple of years that they were drinking really heavily, where all of those signs would point to alcoholism. But as they heal and get better, they start to kind of grow out of that phase. And for me, I never grew out of it. In fact, I would remove anything from my life that would pull me away from alcohol because I wanted to be closer to the alcohol. So anyway, think about all of those things. I know I've given you a lot of information. Think about all of those things when you're trying to figure out if you have a problem or if somebody you care about has a problem. Again, you guys can find me on Instagram, of course, at Addiction Unlimited, naturally, addictionunlimited.com. You can message me there. You can leave me a voicemail. I'd love to hear from you guys if you have any more questions. And next week, we will have another interview, and I hope you guys love that. Have a great week, you guys. We'll see you next week.
You've reached the end of another great episode of the Addiction Unlimited podcast. Candid and honest conversation about addiction and recovery. Be sure to visit us at addictionunlimited.com to join the conversation and access show notes and links to everything we talked about. Love this episode? Please take 30 seconds to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes to help us improve and give you the information you want. Thanks for listening. See you next week.